Well, good morning, everyone. We can now pull that panel down, Fia. Welcome to session 2 of Writing Through Fear. I hope you've had a good week. I hope you've had a chance to do some writing practice during the week. Before we begin, let's just have a moment of silence to gather our thoughts and our energies and leave the outside world outside for the next couple of hours. So if you'd like to join me whenever you're ready, just gently close your eyes or relax them. Take a couple of deep breaths in and out through the nostrils. And we'll just sit for 1 minute together, please. And after your next exhalation, gently open your eyes and come into the room in soft focus. Welcome. So we began last week in our investigation into fear by looking at the primary fears that are obstructing us at the moment. What are the things that are most present and urgent and difficult for us to confront in this time of crisis and upheaval in the world? We looked at the primary fears that are keeping us stuck in place, or the stories around those fears that have us confused and somewhat deluded regarding what is true and what isn't. As we were talking about, when we examine the stories behind our fears, our stories about anything, in fact, we recognize that there's a gap between reality and what it is that we tell ourselves about reality. So we are having an experience at this moment. 20 of us on this call are having an experience at this moment, but we're having 20 different versions of the experience. So as long as we recognize that our interpretation is not the ultimate truth, that is what gives us insight into the narrative mind, how we convince ourselves of things, our particular patterns of delusion and withholding. So today we're going to be looking at love and fear, the relationship between fear and the heart's ability to open and to connect us, which is a particularly important topic for this time. I mean, we've been coming through this period of isolation, of forced separation, not being able to connect with one another. And that's put a lot of pressure on our relationships, not only the relationships with other people, but our relationship with ourselves as well. So we're going to be talking about fear in relationships in the process of creating, maintaining, as well as ending close relationships in our lives, because there are folks who many of us have realized there are people who we thought were with us forever who have actually dropped away, and other people who we never expected to be close necessarily during a crisis, who've become unexpectedly intimate and available to us during this period. So not during the pandemic, we've not only been forced to face ourselves, but also to confront relationships in ways that we may never have done before. Our connections are being tested in very new and unique ways. We've been forced to look at one another across a distance of isolation and to feel affection and connection without necessarily being able to have physical contact. And that has brought up a lot of feelings for a lot of people, a lot of conflict and a lot of sadness. We've had to learn to weather feeling frustrated and estranged or in conflict as well with our different views of what safety means. I don't know about you, but I've had several situations with friends during this time where we had different interpretations of what safety looks like. And not agreeing in that way can create rifts. It can create estrangement between friends. And that has happened not only with me, but many people that I know. What this has done is taxed many of our relationships. And it's also forced us to find new ways of connecting. I mean, look at what we're doing today. Although obviously online classes have been going on forever, they have proliferated, and we've discovered new ways of helping one another during this time, supporting one another, and also finding the kind of fellowship that we need in periods of great uncertainty. So it has forced us to find new ways of connecting. It's also put other intimacies in doubt, as I was just saying, while others have flourished. And as always happens in times of crisis, in relationship as well as other parts of our life, we have been encouraged to look at the true value of things, and how during periods of falling apart and change, things can reveal their true meaning and significance to us. Whether they are worth it or not. And that unfortunately has gone for our friendships as well, and our relationships as well. As I said, people you thought would be there have not been there. Others you thought might never be there have been there. So certain doors have closed while others have opened, as our circumstances and our values have shifted. Families also, of course, have been forced to be apart. New protocols exist now for how, when, and with whom we are able to socialize. And that creates a new language of connection, a new language of relationship that isn't always easy to navigate. This new etiquette, this new pandemic etiquette for intimacy and connection. And it's been quite confusing. It's also been very scary for some people. We've come to realize how dependent we are on others in sometimes new and frightening ways that make us feel vulnerable as well as loved. And others have had quite the opposite, feeling rejection, abandonment, and even the experience of feeling shamed by people that we trust. Shamed around the pandemic etiquette, shamed about not being available, shamed about being too needy, etc. So as relationship fears have multiplied, so have the questions about who and what truly matters to us and how we want to connect differently in the future. How can we take the lessons that we've learned during this period, the lessons about the preciousness of time, about letting other people know that we truly appreciate them, lessons about making conscious effort to maintain a consistency in our connections. How can we bring those lessons learned in extremis into the future? Lots of us are asking these questions these days because we don't want to waste the improvements and the insights that we've gained during this period. We would like to come through stronger and clearer and with more open hearts after this the worst of this time passes. And also with an increased awareness of where we're blocked, where we're shut down, where we're unavailable, or whether we're avoidant when it comes to intimacy and other people. Now, this goes for all forms of relationship, whether they are romantic or familial or platonic or community-based. We all are asking the same questions across the board. And some of these questions are, where do we close our hearts to ourselves and others? What are the obstacles to intimacy and openness? How are we stopped by destructive patterns and unskillful ways of connecting that began in childhood and perhaps continue to persist today? What do we need to communicate that we feel we cannot? That's a big one. What are the difficult conversations that we need to have with people in our lives in order either to deepen the connection or to end the connection? Where are we wounded but don't admit it? Where are we stronger than we know and ready to drop old patterns and narratives of victimization? And finally, how do shame, guilt, and anger obstruct truthfulness in our emotional bonds? So by exploring these questions in writing, we come to see our heart laid bare. You come to see that the heart is the seat of the heart is the seat is the I'm sorry, the heart is the seat of the mind, as it says in the Talmud, meaning that emotions without reason can be just as harmful as thinking without feeling. That in order to have a successful, healthy relationship that's sustainable, that's conscious, that's mutually beneficial, we have to find a balance between the heart and the mind. The emotions are sometimes overprivileged in our culture. And we're told to just go with what you feel. Of course, that can be disastrous, as everybody knows, particularly when it comes to relationship. We can't always we say what we feel and expect there to be wisdom in the relationship. Wisdom is the balance between the heart and the mind, between the emotions and the reason. And unfortunately, reason and logic often get a very bad rep when we talk about relationship. We tend to think that the gut is the seat of final truth, but of course it's not. The gut has deep information for us. Of course, the gut and the emotions are the basis of all morality and all ethics. We need those emotions, those feelings, in order to be ethical people. But we can't trust those gut impulses, which are also connected to very primitive beliefs and patterns that may not serve us at all in our lives or in the way that we love others. So, healthy relationship depends on a proper balance between the heart and the head. It's true what Pascal said, that the heart has its reasons, which reason knows nothing of. But it's also true that the mind has wisdom that transcends the heart. So we want to learn to walk a balance between those two, allow both of them their say without privileging either too much or getting too out of balance. We talked last week about knowledge being the antidote to fear across the board. And this is nowhere more true than in our relationships and in matters of love. The more insight that we have into ourselves and the other, the less scary it's going to be to show tenderness or to reveal dependency. So as we become aware of our patterns, the greatest hits of our fears around relationship, we gain a lot of clarity and power when it comes to how we want to use our affections. Where do we love wisely? Where do we love unwisely? What does right relationship mean? Right relationship in the Buddhist sense. We come to realize that every relationship has its own proper balance, its own proper form. Sometimes a right relationship means very close, ongoing, intimate connection. Sometimes right relationship means no relationship. Right relationship with certain people can mean loving them from afar, and that's the only way we can maintain love and maintain support and well-being. So finding right relationship is absolutely key. And that is what gives us insight into who we are and what we care most about, because we become ourselves in relationship. We can't truly know ourselves without relationship. Having said that, all of our external relationships have to begin with knowing ourselves. And how do we relate to ourselves? What's the quality of self-love in our lives, or the absence of it? Sophia, could we just pull up the first card, please? Here we go, folks. I'd like you now, please, to take 20 minutes to write about the obstacles to self-love in your life today. What are the obstacles to self-love in your own life today? And be as specific as you can be. How do they play out, these obstacles? What does it prevent you from knowing about yourself and other people? Okay, so be as specific as you can be, and as challenge yourself as much as possible. We'll take 20 minutes to do that, please, and then we'll come back together as a group. 15 more minutes, please. What do you fear in yourself? 15 more minutes. Ten more minutes, please. How do these obstacles to self-love interfere with your ability to connect with others? 10 more minutes. 5 more minutes, please. Which of the obstacles to self-love are based on stories that are not true? 5 more minutes. One more minute, please. Let's start to finish up. And let's come back together as a group, please. Welcome back. Put your writing aside for the moment. We're now going to break out into groups for 10 minutes, and then we'll come back together and we can have some conversation before we go into our next writing. So, Thea, why don't we do our breakout groups now?
Mark, remind me of how many people you want in each group.
Well, today we have, 4 people in each group, please.
Okay.
Okay, folks, well, welcome back. And now it would be great to have some questions. If you could type some questions or comments into the chat box, then we can have some dialogue before we go into our next writing. I'm eager to know how this went for you. What did you learn? Were you stuck by the question itself? If so, why? What about the writing practice itself may be not clear to you? This is the time to ask questions and share what's going on. Are you going to be reading the chat, Thea?
Yes, so far there's only wish we had more time.
More time for what?
I imagine breakout group.
Oh, really? Okay, because
Is
other
that
people.
correct, Melinda? It was remarkable how many of us had the fear of being rejected or not accepted by others.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And so, what does that have to do with the obstacles to self-love? What's the connection between the fear of rejection or abandonment and the lack of self-trust, self-love, self-confidence? That's an interesting connection to explore in writing.
Maria says, we had an interesting session, the contradiction between self-love and relationship with others. One of our members said that trauma bonds are preventative of self-love.
Trauma bonds prevent self-love. I would agree with that. I mean, what trauma does is it shuts down our resilience. It shuts down our ability to change our story, so that we're really locked into a very narrow version of how things happen. Bessel van der Kolk, who works with trauma survivors, has said that the thing that distinguishes folks who heal from trauma and those who tend not to heal from trauma is the ability to change our story. So when what trauma does is it freezes us in our story, which of course then blocks self-love as well as our ability to connect with other people. So that's a good point. Thank you.
The exercise made me realize that some things I have felt ashamed about are now valued as a part of what has made me grow.
Meaning that the things you felt ashamed of, you now value. That's what I hear you saying, which is a wonderful insight to have. That really is what evolution is about. When we turn around and realize that the things that we most disliked about ourselves turn out to have guided us to some of our greatest strengths or our greatest insights. That's what maturity is. Is it flips around. It turns the obstacle upside down, as the Stoics like to say. And when we do that, it brings a new kind of insight and a maturity of self-awareness that enables us to embrace more of ourselves. And that's what writing does, is it creates this space where we can allow more of who we are into our heart, into our own acceptance. But we can't transform what we haven't first blessed. So until we've allowed it into our awareness, provided some kind of blessing or acceptance of it, nothing can change. And that's a very important piece, recognizing that what we see as our flaws are very often the bridges to insights that we wouldn't have reached in any other way. And that's, of course, why crisis can become a great teacher. It can become a great agent of transformation, as unpleasant as it is to go through. And the same goes with personal insight. As unpleasant as it can be to see certain things about ourselves, they turn out to be our greatest teachers and our greatest gifts, because they show us where the pain is. And pain is information. The wounding, while nothing that we would choose for ourselves, actually is a doorway to self-awareness. And it's also a doorway to compassion toward other people. So as we accept our flaws and our wounds and our failings and the things in us that never make sense, it also opens us up to those qualities in other people. And that's the beauty of humility, really, is that it enables us, it enables the heart to open. The heart without humility can't open. It can't appreciate another person's struggles. It can't tolerate another person's difficulties or contradictions. So humility really is the royal road to being able to open our hearts and love not only ourselves but others as well. So thanks.
One member shared the contemplation of what is self-love, and another person has the question, can you speak to self-love and wanting to please others? I think they kind of go together.
Yes, well, those are and that's a big one. What is self-love? Because self-love doesn't mean narcissism. It doesn't mean self-cherishing. It doesn't mean I'm so amazing. It's not about sort of putting ourselves above other people. The way I like to think of it is that self-love is loving our humanity. It's loving, as the Buddhists call it, our Buddha nature, that thing in us that is universal, that is worthy, that has integrity, that is good. And that's what we learn to love about ourselves and recognize in other people. It's not about patting ourselves on the back for being so utterly unique or original, or congratulating ourselves on our eccentricities. That's not what self-love is about. It's about touching into that deep universal part of ourselves and saying we belong, we deserve, we are worthy, simply by virtue of the fact that we are human beings, having been given a precious human life. Now, in terms of self-love and pleasing other people, those can very often be antithetical movements. Not all the time. There are times when pleasing others is part of loving ourselves. Let's say you're in a relationship, let's say you're a parent with a child. Part of self-love and self-confidence and self-worth is pleasing and helping and nurturing the child. So that can be a beautiful thing. But when self-love, when pleasing others contradicts our own best interests, or it forces us to be inauthentic in some way, to muzzle ourselves, to silence ourselves, those two things are antithetical. So it really is a case-by-case situation. In general, people pleasing isn't the road to authenticity. It's not the road to truth. It tends to come out of insecurity, which we're going to be looking at in the next writing. It tends to come out of neediness. It tends to come out of unhealthy attachment. Also, it can be people pleasing is about putting the control and the power outside of ourselves. So saying, if I do this, then you'll love me. If I do this, then you'll approve of me. If I do this, then you won't punish me or you won't leave me. These are fear-based patterns that it is really important for us to look into if we don't want to, not only if we don't want to keep being obsessed with pleasing others, but we don't want to keep abandoning ourselves. Because when we take others' sides, so to speak, against ourselves, we conspire against our own well-being. And how often do we gang up on ourselves along with others? So if somebody is unfair to you, there's a part of the psyche that can say, well, I deserve it, or they must be right. And so we don't take our own side very often, which has a lot to do with what self-love means. Self-love means loyalty to what we know to be true, and understanding that who we are is something unique and something that is of true value. So we learn not to denigrate ourselves in the attempt to please others or the attempt to have others like us. Another thing that we do very often is we shrink to fit. And I hear this a lot from women in particular. Learning to shrink to fit so men aren't threatened by you, shrinking to fit in a relationship so that you're not too big for your britches, so you're not accused of being full of yourself. So we assume this kind of false modesty, which is not the same thing as humility, false modesty to go along and to fit in. But what that does is it sabotages our power, and it sabotages what in us wants to grow and what is alive and wants to show itself and demonstrate itself. So we tamp that down for fear of our own power, fear of our own light, fear of being too big for ourselves. And that's a huge issue, not only for women, but for men as well. There are lots of ways that men shrink to fit the image of what we believe men are supposed to be and what's acceptable for men. So thanks for that. We'll do one more before we move into our next writing.
Yeah, we have several more, but okay.
Actually, we can do it. We can do a few more. We have five more. We have 5 minutes.
Okay. One says, my obstacle has been accepting others' perception and evaluation of me, which has not allowed me to find a practical way forward, as it shuts down the avenues available to me. Relationship to self-love would be not accepting myself accurately, which means that I cannot take the right action, kind of like going into a cul-de-sac instead of straight road ahead of me.
Can you read just the beginning of that comment again, please, Fia?
My obstacle has been accepting others' perception / evaluation of me.
So let's just stop there. So I'm just curious why you would feel compelled to accept others' evaluation of you. That's not your business. Other people's evaluation of us is not our business. So if you feel like it's incumbent on you to accept what others say about you, I would question that. Because that can often be about taking other people's side against yourself, or the people pleasing, feeling like I need to jump through this hoop in order to be acceptable. So I don't know, self-love and accepting what other people say about you don't necessarily go together. Can you read the rest of that comment, please?
Yes. It has not allowed me to find a practical way forward, as it shuts down the avenues available to me. Relationship to self-love would be not accepting myself accurately, which means that I cannot take the right action.
Okay, I don't really understand that, I'm afraid. A relationship to self-love means not accepting yourself accurately. If you could clarify that, I'd be happy to address the rest of that comment. So thanks.
Okay, there's another question that isolation with COVID has brought a person back to the trauma place and back to old stories. How to change these if you say stories can't change in trauma?
Well, they can change. The problem is that the effect of trauma is to freeze them in place. So we need to correct for that. We need to consciously work at changing those stories. So for you in this situation, it's a great opportunity to see what's different between what's the isolation you're feeling now and the trauma experience that you carry with you that is sort of stuck in a fixed perspective, a fixed narrative. And once you do that, you'll see how the leap you're making from here to there, the way it's being triggered, is based on false assumptions. It's based on false equivalencies, ways that things don't actually connect but seem to, because they touch on similar emotions. So what I would recommend is for you to write about what is the difference between the trauma of now and the trauma of then, in the way you feel it today and the way you understand it today. What's the difference? Because as you see the light between those two stories, you're going to see that you're conflating them, and then they're becoming bigger and bigger and weighing us down. And that's how everything begins to seem like the trauma that we once had, because we don't take the time to separate out what is different, what is not true. And that's why I asked you to look at which of these obstacles to self-love are based on stories that are not true. That's critical, because the mind believes what we tell it until we tell it differently. And that's how trauma becomes an endless looping and rumination. Until we question it, nothing shifts. So question this conflation of what's going on now with the trauma of your youth, and see where the gaps are, where are the differences, where are the distances. That's what's going to give you more insight. Thanks.
And one last comment. It takes quite a lot of strength to find your own voice without damaging others and be truer to yourself.
It does. It can. Absolutely. Um, and I would say it's worth looking into why it's such a challenge. Is this about the people in your life and the particular kinds of relationships that you have that are so fragile that they can't tolerate your truth or your being honest? Or is it because you have a history of simply not being able to speak up for yourself, being able to own what is true for you, being able to disagree with other people? That probably has a lot to do with it. So I'd suggest that you look at what scares you about what you have to say, what your voice needs to express, and what you believe other people are going to think about it or how they're going to respond. Okay, because that fear story of what people are going to do is an invention. And when we get that, when we see that we're mind reading, we're projecting, we're making all kinds of false assumptions, it becomes less difficult to trust our own voice. So give that a try. Let me know how it goes. So let us move into the next writing, please. Next. Here we go. I'd like you now, please, to take 20 minutes to write about how fear and insecurity affect your personal relationships. Okay, how do fear and insecurity affect the various personal relationships in your life? This is a large topic, so just dive in and see where it takes you. Okay, how does fear affect the people, your connection with the people that you care about? 20 minutes, please. We'll come back together as a group. 15 more minutes, please. Are there relationships in your life in which you're afraid to be yourself? And if so, why? 15 more minutes, please. 10 more minutes, please. Are there challenging conversations that you need to have with the people you care about most? And if so, what's stopping you from having them? 10 more minutes. 5 more minutes, please. Are there relationships in your life where you're afraid to let the other person be him or herself? It's an important question. 5 more minutes. One more minute, please. Let's start to finish up. Okay, well, welcome back, everyone. We're going to go into breakout groups again, and I will give you 15 minutes this time, give you more a chance to connect. So, Fia, why don't we open up those breakout groups, and I'll see everyone in 15 minutes. Welcome back, everyone. So I'm curious to know how this second writing went for you today. Were you able to identify relationships where fear or insecurity are blocking the ability to connect, the ability to trust, the ability to open up to the other? How does this play out? And what do these relationships reflect about patterns in your life when it comes to interpersonal connection? Be great to have some conversation now, Fia. We can open up videos and everything. Any questions, folks?
If people want to raise their hands, either virtually or real, it looks like Thomas has a question.
Yeah, hi. I noticed. Hi. I noticed that where I stop in relationships with friends, that this has been going on for decades with the same people, where where I'm afraid to let persons be themselves, and the area I'm afraid to let them be themselves is with their anger. Like if they get really angry, then I feel like I got to manage their anger. And I know it's a tripwire to when I was a kid, where the consequences of anger were no more talking. That's it. Or physical violence or corporal punishment or something. And I realized that, the passion that's in anger and the passion, and of course, like the way it gets cartoon or polarized in the political debate and the different points of view, and it gets so we can't even have a conversation. And also we can't, someone was saying, I'm trying to find her there, Heather was talking about regulation or co-regulation, kind of being with someone when they're angry, and rather than taking it as a personal offense, but realizing that I'm probably a tripwire to their anger, so I appease them and back off, but at the same time it's draining me, and it's probably draining the relationship that they can't be angry. And also I'm afraid of my own anger. Because
there we go. I was wondering how long it would take to get to that.
So I already wrote it down ahead of time, but I had to bring it to the group. I had to co-regulate. I had to. Yeah. So I'm afraid of my own anger because of rage I've experienced through anger, and I'm afraid, like, well, where's my anger gonna go? It's gonna be kind of wild, and also I tend to cut off, and then I enter a shame mode when I lose it too. When I lose my temper, I enter a shame mode. So it's got all kinds of consequences, and maybe I definitely want to move forward towards having my anger rather than it having me, and finding a way to bring consciousness to it. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. So Thomas, have you had the experience in relationship where anger came up for you and you were able to communicate it skillfully without blaming the other person, without getting aggressive or attacking? Do you know what that experience feels like?
Yes, it took 2 weeks in between to get back in gear with that person. Yeah,
it did. Okay, all right.
Yeah, so I had to let it sift, and all the other stuff connected with the anger. Yeah, but it takes a little more time. I don't have the ability to bring it back, and it could be something they were doing. They were doing a shame. They were tripwiring or whatever, and I called them on it, and then it's somehow, what do you mean? And then I mean, I'm feeling angry at you, and I don't feel like I trust you or whatever. And then it took 2 weeks when we had to meet again, and somehow I was able to find words for my side of it, and they found words for their side of it. Yeah.
And did it increase the intimacy in the relationship?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It was like, that was the stopping point. And then
Yeah.
that was the no-go area. And then if we can articulate the no-go area, then we have a place to go that's different than the old familiar habitual way of being with each other. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why it's worth going through the hard moment of needing to confront it in some way that isn't, hopefully attacking and too aggressive. But that's the point. That's why we do it, because without that, we can't actually have intimacy in our lives. So
yeah, it's so tricky though. It's so tricky in the culture where people, use guns and weapons, and it builds on itself in a whole kind of way. So it's almost like, but I realize with more intimate relationship, that's the place to build it, so we can get a more grounded voice in other areas, I think.
Absolutely. So what I recommend, Thomas, is for you is explore what your triggers around anger are. What are the things that really get you? Just reflexively, the knee-jerk things.
Yeah,
and
dismissiveness. Yeah.
Dismissiveness. Okay, so what's your story about dismissiveness? That would be a great thing to explore.
Yeah, the shame of that. Yeah.
The shame and the anger of feeling dismissed, of feeling belittled, of feeling disappeared or silenced. Right. That brings up a lot of anger. But it sounds like there's a historical element to this that's the real charge. Yeah. It's not about the other person. So to the degree that you're aware of what that old narrative is, it won't be manipulating you in quite the same unconscious way.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Good luck with it. Sure.
Appreciate it.
There is an interesting comment. Two in the group felt their authenticity wasn't damaged in relationship with self, but one felt that being honest invariably brings up trauma issues. My feeling is it's all about damage limitation. And even with those closest, that you have to lose the need to be right.
That's absolutely true. Yeah. And so is the need to be right connected to the trauma, if I'm understanding correctly, that is part of what keeps the trauma going, is the need to be right? I'd love to, if you want to, even if you don't want to be on video, if you could just
Maria, do you want to unmute and
yeah.
Hi everyone.
Hi
the
there.
need to be hi the need to be correct. It's taken me about 5 years of counseling and pretty much all my life to deal with certain issues that brought up feelings of profound worthlessness, being minimized, not my voice not being valued enough to even be heard. It's quite something to get to the point where you feel you do have something to say, that it does count. And I've noticed that other people have not moved on in the same frequency. So there is a challenge in having relationships with these particular people, because they are very important. They're part of them. They're the closest people I have that I call family. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, damage limitation is, I've lost the need to get confirmation from them.
Good.
About whether I'm right or wrong, or whatever the story is. It's good to know the story. It's good to understand it. I've worked for years around it. Now right. I need to focus on writing down something instead of it all being up there. And damage limitation comes when you grow that seed of self-love, you realize that there are things that really promote that growth.
Wow. Yes. And what are you saying that these folks in your life have, when you say they haven't moved on, do you mean they're playing the same old record, they're playing the same old tune, and they don't hear you? They don't allow?
They've moved on. No, they've moved on in their life, very much so, but not moved on when it comes to that subject matter
That's what I
that
meant.
has caused a break in the family. So that subject matter, they cannot face it. And the other one cannot face his own gambling, his own issues.
Right.
So,
Right.
yeah.
So you can't actually express yourself honestly without
Not
what, being
really.
attacked or being shut down.
Or being, yes.
Yeah. And so I trust that you recognize that you're beating your head against a closed door there, and that it's not your job to try and convince them of anything or bring them around. It's not your responsibility.
Yeah, but my job was to find out what it was that was keeping me insane.
Yes, absolutely. But that has nothing to do with changing them.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And that's sometimes sad when we come up against these limitations that just aren't changing. We've done everything in our power. We've been as honest as we can be. We've been as open and flexible as we can be. And folks are not there. Then we realize these are just intransigent limitations that aren't going to change. And then we learn to love them or not within that context. Yeah.
But I have to be honest that there was a limitation in me in that I wanted to be validated, to be right, to be,
Sure.
It's not important to compared to my sanity and my health. And, it's the first time I found that space. I want to keep it. I don't want to throw it all away.
Yes. Good. And one way of strengthening that is by not trying to change what you can't change, what really isn't your business to change. That keeps you in yourself and what's true for you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There are 3 questions that seem to me to kind of go together, and it's basically relationships during the pandemic have revolved around politics a lot, and how to remain true to ourselves when the people we love take strident political or social positions that run counter to our knowledge of them and the people they have been in the past. And if you let the other be himself and see something that is so different from your own views, how do you maintain the love that you have for other things about them?
This is such a big problem these days in this polarized time. The first thing is to realize that another person's opinion is none of our business, that they're allowed to have whatever position they want to have, and that to the degree that we are invested in convincing them or changing their mind or bringing them around, that's about us. That's about our ego. That's about our control. So the question is, can you love someone without bringing in aspects of, inviting into the conversation aspects of them that are anathema to you, that you find that make you angry or that you don't respect? And the answer has to be yes, because there's no one in our life who we agree with completely. So we learn that there are limitations and that there are boundaries. In the most intimate relationship, there are boundaries. There are places you don't go. There are things that you simply will never agree on. And part of being a grown-up and having an enduring, sustainable love is recognizing that is agreeing to disagree in certain areas and respecting the other enough to let them have their opinion. It's not our job to change other people. I love what Byron Katie says. There are 3 kinds of business in the world. There's my business, your business, and God's business. And when we start to really get clear on which is which, it helps so much in our relationships. So much conflict comes from not minding our own business and thinking that we have more control or more influence than we actually do on the other person. We really don't. And that's the beauty of doing this deep work is we get, that's mine and that's theirs. And the two may never meet. And that's okay. Until it's not. I mean, there are times when we have relationships with people who go off in directions that we really cannot tolerate or that really go against our character. And then sometimes it's appropriate not to communicate with those people or to really get that it is compromising compromising our ability to love and to feel respected by them. I know people who right now are having issues with people in their life who are involved with QAnon, for example, and I don't want to offend anyone on the call who may be involved with QAnon, but this is something that she absolutely cannot tolerate, and she's had to make a very tough decision and realize that she can't actually have anything to do with those people because it feels like it's seeping into everything. And she doesn't feel, and she feels like she's collaborating in a weird way by not speaking up. So it's better for her not to have contact. So it's tricky. But thanks.
Can you speak to how power weaves together with insecurity?
Well, sure. I mean, they're both ego related. We feel insecure because our ego is somehow not being affirmed or paid enough attention to. And power is always connected to egotism, power over the other or feeling disempowered by the other. So really the root question there is, how do we deal with our own ego in relationship? Both when it comes to insecurity and when it comes to power and the need for power or feeling overpowered. And that goes to looking at our own needs and as well as our own attachment patterns. You know, we all have particular attachment patterns. There are 3 general attachment patterns, which you've probably heard of. You know, there's secure attachment. You know, when we've had sufficient attention from our primary caregiver as children, we know who we are more or less. We feel like we belong in the world more or less. That's about half the people. And the other half of the population splits down the middle between anxious attachment, which is insecure, clinging kind of attachment, or avoidant attachment, fear of intimacy, fear of commitment. So understanding where we are on that spectrum, because we're all a mixture of them, helps a lot when it comes to dealing with our own ego in relationship and understanding what our needs and our patterns are. So you realize it's not about the other person. It's that I always feel unheard in the world, for example. Well, that's a kind of anxious attachment style that doesn't feel like we are seen. That has to do with us. It's not about the other person. So that would be an example of insecurity in a relationship that is universalized. It's globalized, and it's not about the particular relationship. Then there are other relationships where power dynamics are unhealthy, and that's very real, and we need to look at those, you know, step by step and see what our part is in it. You know, that's the other thing about feeling victimized. And when we feel victimized, there's always a perpetrator. So do we blame other people in relationship a lot? Do you find yourself putting the responsibility on them or feeling like they're doing X, Y, or Z to you? If so, then perhaps you're in an overly passive position in your relationships and need to feel more agency and take more responsibility for the way that things are playing out. So really knowing our own patterns is key to dealing with all kinds of insecurity and power dynamics in relationships. So thanks.
The most interesting part of these prompts was realizing the difficult convo I needed to have is with myself, and the relationship where I'm afraid to let them be themselves is me. Such a rich insight. Thank you.
Good. That's really important. So then the next step would be, what are you afraid of in yourself? What don't you allow to manifest in yourself, and why? You know, what are the stories behind that? Well, if I speak up too much, this is going to happen. Or as Tom was saying, if I'm angry, this is going to happen. These are narratives that are on loops that play over and over in our lives. So asking, you know, what am I afraid of in myself? What do I not accept? What do I not give voice to? And that's going to sort of open up that dialogue with self. And I encourage you, once again, folks, when you're doing this writing, be as risky, as shameless as you can be. Write down the embarrassing things, the things that are really hard to admit, the things that kind of give you the creeps about yourself or about other people. That's where the insight comes from. So don't be too polite. You know, be tough on yourself without being cruel. You know, be kind, but stern, you could say, firm rather with yourself. Don't let yourself off the hook with BS or with the same old stories that we've been telling, over and over again, because that no change comes from that. So, thanks.
And the last one, I think, is how does social justice and not just turning a blind eye play into whose business it is when there is systemic injustice?
That's an important question. That's a huge question. Social justice, when we're talking about my business, your business, and God's business, I was talking about interpersonal relationships. When you open it up to social justice issues, it does become our business. How other people behave, the laws other people pass, the cruelty that other people display. These things are our business. But it's about separating the action from the actor, so that rather than condemning the person who is being unfair or whose politics we don't agree with, we keep their attention on the position themselves, on the positions themselves, and the issues themselves, rather than becoming ad hominem attacks on the individuals. So it is my business what laws are passed in my country. But it's not my business to go into why so-and-so holds that position and then attack them personally for it. That becomes something that isn't useful. What's useful is to keep our eyes on the ball, and the social change that we want to see happen is bigger than the individuals, right? And the part of the problem with the age we live in is it's all becomes so personal. Everything is character assassination rather than keeping our eyes on the issues themselves. So that's really, when it comes to my business, your business, God's business. If we keep our eyes on the issues, that's going to help us to be more fair, to not take things as personally, and not to attack people as individuals. Because no growth, no evolution comes from that. And we just get petty and mean, and we shrink in our own virtue, and we become very often like the people that we are criticizing. We can be as mean as the folks who we accuse of being heartless.
Cynthia, who posed the question, says, "Thank you. This has been a daily struggle for me to distinguish and navigate. This is helpful."
Good. I hope so, Cynthia. And it's tough. It's something we're all trying to navigate in these extreme times with so much conflict. How can we hate the injustice without the wrongdoer, without hating the person who is committing whatever the act is? That's a fine line, but it's a spiritual practice. It's very, very important, because otherwise we condemn folks and we don't give them the opportunity to change. There's no feeling of rehabilitation. They become, we label them with that, that brush of evil, or whatever our particular, labels are, and they stop being human beings. So we want to try to keep a sense of people as human beings, seeing them in the round and understanding that they, like us, have severe limitations and make mistakes. And how can we allow that to happen without condoning it, but without trashing the people themselves? Because spiritually, that's very damaging.
All right, one more question.
Okay.
Is there a continuum reconnection to others on our writing journey? I know there is a catch up. Just a question.
I'm not sure. Are you saying, is there a continuum with the people in this class? Is that the question? Or
Maria, do you want to unmute and talk?
Well,
you're unmuted. You're muted now. There you go. Oh, no. Try again. There you go.
I'm just interested if there is any way we connect with each other in between this lovely group that we have. Is there?
Yes. Well, the Google the Google Docs where I put the deepening prompts from last week. You can write to me either through there or through the class. And if you want to connect with others, you can also write through my personal email, Mark Matusik, contact@markmatusik.com. And if you want to connect with others or create some kind of support group afterward or ongoing writing group, I can try to help facilitate that.
That sounds good.
Good.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, folks. Well, I think we may be at time. Yes, we are indeed. We're over time. So thank you again. It's wonderful to see you. Thanks for your practice this morning. And I will see you next Saturday for our last class. And look out tomorrow for deepening prompts for you to work on during the week. So thank you so much. And thank you, Thea.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks so much.